Now, the paint over model with deep displacement is Microvertex because you're working with displacement maps. And the way it operates is a bit different than it works with per pixel painting. So this method here is per pixel painting. This method is Microvertex. Per pixel painting, again, they operate a little bit differently, but the main difference is that you're working with a displacement map in Microvertex, whereas you're working with normal map relief painting in per pixel painting mode. So I'll click on this, and you have some similar options here. You can bring a model in, or you can use these starting points. Hit OK. Hit the 4 key for the wireframe, and I'll turn specularity off and work with just color and depth. Okay. Now I have this brush alpha with, I'm going to increase the thumbnail size, and let's go with something like this, and I'll choose the stamp tool. I've got symmetry on the wrong plane here. I'll turn the symmetry plane on along the Z-axis, and I can see what axis I'm on by going to the View menu. Okay, under Axis, turn that on, and I can see the X positive is red. Okay, and light blue is the X negative, and so on. Yeah. So I'm going to bring up the texture editor, and I can see the color channel. Under normals is the displacement map, vector displacement map. And I can actually tweak. It's actually displacing the geometry while I'm painting, but I can actually go in and make some larger scale edits if I need some detailed edits to this mesh. Yeah, let's do that. Let's maybe pinch or collapse. Want to do that. So the difference between the two rooms is tweak is actually moving this base mesh, whereas in the paint room 3D Code is actually displacing this using a displacement map. Okay, now if I turn that off, you can see, boom, the geometry is not changed. It's only allowing this displacement map to affect it real time. So this would be similar if you are familiar with 3ds Max, for example. In the viewport you can apply a displacement modifier, and it will allow you to see displacement instead of only at render time. You can actually see it in the viewport. Okay, and so that's essentially what you have here. You can see it in real time as you're sculpting. So this is one method of sculpting in 3D Coat. Let's choose something else here. Let's try some lizard scales of some kind. We'll choose something like this. And again, I'll use my stamp brush. And you can rotate it as you go. And X to change my foreground background color. Change this more kind of a dingy green. So this is one efficient way to actually sculpt these types of high resolution or very high frequency details without actually having to increase the usage of your system resources in the voxel sculpting room. So it's something to keep in mind. You can do this, especially with live clay and whatnot, so it just gives you some additional options based on what your needs are. Okay. Yeah. Use a regular brush here. And increase the fall off. And so on. Okay, so let's go File menu, New, Continue. Go back here, click the same model. 2K is fine. Okay. And you see it's much lower resolution as far as the geometry. But we can still get plenty of resolution detail. So what I'm going to do is, yeah, we'll choose one of these. Choose my stamp tool again here. And so I don't have to have extra geometry to be able to capture this. It's using the normal map. Now if I put this toward the top, you'll notice this is the limitation of normal maps or bump maps. One of the great things about this type of painting with image-based sculpting is that you can stack bump on top of one another. Let's choose some type of a reptile skin here. Hit X. Okay, I'll do that. We'll right click and drag down to decrease the depth on this. I can use cavity painting to paint just on the recesses instead of the cavities. So I'll choose less and cavity, so it's just a reverse of cavity painting. And I'm going to crank up the scale a bit. Okay, so you can see how efficient this can be. Alright, so you can do the same thing here. Okay, you can use a stamp tool. You can also smooth and so on your object using the 2D texture editor and see the updates live. Okay. Alright, so we'll go back to the File menu under New, go back to the splash screen here. And so yeah, you have the retopology room. You can import a reference mesh if you are bringing in something from, let's say, ZBrush or Mudbox, a really dense mesh that you want to use as the basis to retopologize on top of. Import a retopo mesh. Again, if you have a low polygon mesh, you import it in as a voxel sculpting object. Okay, you can import your low poly in, okay, as your retopo mesh. I hope that makes sense to you. Basically, you're just reusing this instead of starting from scratch all over again. You don't have to model twice. You can use the same model that you started with and use that as your retopologized mesh, and 3D Coat will snap it. Now this one, it's primarily if you brought in maybe a scanned mesh, or if you started in 3D Coat from scratch using the voxel modeling tools, you may want to use the auto retopology tool to apply nice even quads, and it does a relatively good job. We'll go into that in greater detail later. Alright, so yeah, you can open a recent file, UV map a model, bring a model in to go straight into the UV room, and you have your UV panel here. Okay, and prototype models. Okay, so much of this is, again, like the others at the top of the menu or at the top of the splash screen, where it brings you into the voxel sculpting room. It's very similar to the working with a scan mesh, but this one has a couple different options. Prepare it for laser cutting, remove undercuts. Okay, and it has an undercut tool. Okay, so let's go back. Painting with Ptex. Okay, I can go ahead and set the resolution initially. We'll leave it at 2K, that's fine. The carcass resolution, it probably should be renamed viewport resolution. Okay, and we'll go a little bit higher. And essentially what Ptex is a elegant auto UV tool set. It will allow you, instead of manually having to go into your UV panel or UV tools and scale up islands and whatnot, it will take every single polygon you have on the model and basically give its own little island or its own little cluster, as you can see. I'll zoom out here, turn the wireframe, and so you can see all the polygons on the model, and they are in no contiguous form, so it makes it very difficult, if almost impossible, to actually edit in the 2D texture space. But at least you can use this to view how dense or how much it's occupying this space. So initially it's going to leave you some room, but what you can do is paint areas that you want. I'm going to choose a different brush alpha here, and at the very bottom under your Ptex icon, you click on this tool, and let me scroll down here to expose the tool options here. So under Ptex, here are your tools, and you can set your texture size here, and you can hover over and you'll get some tooltips. Optimize texture space occupied by Ptex quads. Okay, and let's say I have an area where I maybe want eyes. Okay, so I'm just paint selecting areas where 3D Coat will now, when I click increase resolution, you'll notice it will scale these up to max level. Okay, and I still have room on my UV texture space here. So if I want to go in other areas like the toes, I still have room to scale these up. Increase resolution. Okay, and you can see how that works. So essentially, again, what this does is it effectively allows you to modify your UV maps on the fly while you're actually working on the model. And 3D Coat is actually quite unique in its implementation of Ptex. You can export Ptex files just as you would in other applications that now support Ptex. But if you want to work in Ptex and 3D Coat using its technology, but export it as a map that it can be read by other renderers and bake straight away without any problems, then you just simply export. And 3D Coat will, instead of exporting as a Ptex file and having to worry about all that, it will just store all this color information on a texture map. Okay. Again, you won't see any contiguous islands. For example, you won't see the face like you would on a regular UV map, and for that reason you may opt not to use Ptex. Okay, you may opt to just stay with a standard UV mapping because the UV tools in 3D Coat are extremely fast and very easy. You just select seams and click unwrap. You can maybe arrange your islands the way you want, or you could just let it auto pack the UVs as you need. It's very fast, very easy, and it does a remarkably good job. So in my own personal experience, Ptex is not as important. It's not. I don't use it hardly ever for that very reason, because this 2D texture editor is so powerful, such a key part of this application, that you're almost foregoing its use to use Ptex. So either way you go, you give up something in one regard or another. I just find that it's using UV maps in 3D Coat is probably more advantageous, just depending on your needs and your circumstances. So, okay, so let's go back to the splash screen. And I think that will conclude this. We will pick up from here, going in greater detail in the individual rooms and start covering some of the individual tools. So stay tuned.